He stood before Genghis Khan, a figure so absolute that even the air seemed to bow in silence. The man on the throne did not need to shout. His presence alone commanded the world around him. In his eyes there was no mercy, only the certainty of purpose. Those who came to plead for their lives soon understood that this was not a ruler moved by rage, but by a deeper conviction. To defy him was to defy the order of the earth itself. The 13th century was already a cruel age, yet he transformed cruelty into a language of power. The Mongolian steppe stretched like an endless sea, harsh and unforgiving. From this barren land, he forged an empire that would cover half the known world. But his true weapon was not the sword. It was fear, shaped and sharpened with precision. He learned that terror could travel faster than armies, that the story of one death could conquer more cities than 10,000 riders. To him, execution was not an act of madness. It was a message written in flesh and silence. Every punishment carried intention. Each death calculated to teach a lesson that words could not. The Mongol Yasa, his code of life and death, turned justice into strategy. Mercy belonged only to those who surrendered before the storm. Those who resisted became examples carved into memory. In his reign, death ceased to be chaos. It became order. It became art. And through that art he ruled not just the lands he conquered, but the minds that feared him. The echo of his justice carried beyond the deserts and the mountains, whispering to every kingdom that power, when absolute, needs no sword to be obeyed. Every execution was not just a punishment, but a performance of power. If you believe that history still trembles under the weight of such power, stay and subscribe to our channel, where the echoes of empires never die. Among the Mongols, there lived an ancient belief whispered through generations of shamans that royal blood must never be spilled upon the ground. The earth was sacred, and to stain it with the blood of kings would disturb the spirits that guided the living. Genghis Khan, who ruled men with iron certainty, still bowed before this invisible law. When noble enemies were condemned, their deaths were designed to honor that belief and to terrify those who witnessed them. The preparations began with ritual precision. The condemned were stripped of weapons and titles. Thick carpets were spread on the ground, woven with the dust of 1,000 journeys. The prisoners were wrapped tightly until no movement remained, their breath shallow, their voices swallowed by the heavy wool. Once cocooned, they ceased to resemble human beings. They became bundles of silence waiting for the sound that would end them. The command was given. The first horse moved forward. Its hooves struck the earth like slow thunder. Then another followed, and another. The riders circled in wide arcs, drawing closer each time. The sound of hooves grew louder, filling the air with a rhythm that felt almost sacred. When the horses reached the carpets, the world seemed to hold its breath. A muffled crack, then another, then silence. No scream, no blood, only the dull thud of flesh meeting fate. Dust rose in a trembling cloud, and then all was still. Malik Juveni, the Persian chronicler who served under the Mongols, recorded these moments with both awe and horror. He wrote of nobles from Khwarezm wrapped in felt so tightly they could not breathe, placed in the path of galloping horses until the life inside them vanished. Witnesses described the quiet that followed, a silence deeper than mourning, as if the air itself refused to move until the last soul was gone. To the Mongols, this method carried meaning far beyond death. It was not only a way to kill without sin, but a performance of dominance and belief. It told the world that Genghis Khan could destroy without breaking divine order. The victims were denied the dignity of warrior blood spilled in battle. Instead, they suffocated beneath the weight of ritual, their deaths hidden from the sky, their honor buried beneath felt and hoof. The carpet flattened, but fear remained. The story began in the city of Otrar, where a governor named Inalchuk chose greed over wisdom. He seized a caravan of Mongol merchants, accusing them of spying, and executed them to claim their wealth. It was an act born of arrogance, but it reached the ears of Genghis Khan like a spark falling on dry grass. The Khan demanded justice, and when it was denied, he promised that Otrar would drown in its own arrogance. From that moment, the fate of the governor was sealed. When the city finally fell after months of siege, Inalchuk was captured alive. He was brought before the Mongol commanders, his chains rattling softly in the still air. The sentence had already been chosen by Genghis Khan himself. The punishment would be slow, deliberate, and unforgettable. The men prepared crucibles of silver, heating them until the metal glowed white in the darkness. The fire hissed, and the air filled with the sharp scent of burning fuel. Every soldier knew that what would follow was not only vengeance, but a message. As the molten silver shimmered, the executioners held the governor still. His eyes were wide, reflecting the light like glass about to shatter. When the first drop fell, it burned through the delicate tissue of the ear, a soundless scream frozen in his throat. The silver flowed deeper, boiling what it touched, until the body arched against the chains in pain too great for breath. The process continued. First the ears, then the eyes, each drop marking the moment when power and punishment became one. Those blinded by greed will see silver before they die. The crowd stood motionless. Even the soldiers who had seen 1,000 deaths could not look away. The cries faded into a low moan, then into silence. When it ended, the smell of burned flesh lingered in the wind, and the body remained upright, its face streaked with thin metallic lines where tears should have been. No blood had been spilled, yet every witness felt stained. News of Inalchuk's death spread faster than any army. Across deserts and mountains, merchants and rulers repeated the tale in whispers. They spoke of a man who had been deaf to justice and blinded by greed, punished in a way that mirrored his sin. Cities surrendered without resistance, their leaders trembling at the thought of silver and fire. In the end, the corpse was left standing for all to see. Silver tears hardened on his cheeks, a monument to obedience through fear. The lesson was clear and eternal. The Mongols did not need words to rule. They needed only the memory of silver that once burned through human eyes. The story of silver and fire did not end with the death of Inalchuk. Genghis Khan believed justice was not finished until every root of defiance had been burned from the earth. The greed of the governor had been punished, but behind him stood another figure whose ambition had poisoned an empire. Her name was Turkan Khatun, the mother of Shah Muhammad II, and the true voice behind the throne of Khwarezm. For years she had ruled through her son, veiled in silk yet sharper than any sword. It was she who urged the Shah to reject Mongol peace, to insult the envoys, to believe that no force born from the steppe could challenge her empire. Her confidence had been the pride of a dynasty, and pride was the one sin Genghis Khan never forgave. When the walls of Khwarezm fell and her son fled into the mountains, He left behind the woman who had once called herself the Mother of Kings. The soldiers found her in a courtyard filled with broken columns and scattered jewels. The scent of smoke hung in the air, carrying the ruin of 1,000 palaces. She was brought before the Mongol commanders, who said nothing. At her feet lay the body of a donkey freshly slaughtered. Its hide was still warm, glistening under the sun. Without a word, they began their work. The skin was peeled, stretched, and opened wide. Turkan Khatun was forced to lie within it, the coarse leather closing around her body where silk had once touched. The first stitches sealed her wrists, the next her chest, the next her face. The air grew heavy inside the shrinking shell. Her breath came in short gasps. As the sun rose, the hide began to harden, tightening like the grip of invisible hands. The warmth of the dead animal turned to suffocating heat, pressing against her skin until it felt like stone. Those who witnessed it said that she did not scream. The only sound was the dry creak of leather contracting under the sun. By noon, her form had begun to twist, her body reduced to a single rigid mass. Her jewels cut into her flesh, and the scent of her perfume mixed with decay. What had once been a woman of beauty and command was now a dark shape on the desert floor. Her death was not meant to destroy a person, but a memory. The Mongols erased her name from records, her face from murals, her story from the mouths of those who had served her. In their silence, they made her vanish from history, as if she had never ruled, never spoken, never lived. When her name faded, the empire followed. After the fall of Khwarezm, the Mongol storm moved east. There, in the fractured kingdoms of China, Genghis Khan found not only enemies but traitors, men who had sworn loyalty to him and then sold it for gold. For such betrayal, there was a punishment unlike any other. It was not fire or blade. It was the water itself. A wooden cage would become the executioner, and the river its silent accomplice. The condemned man was a Chinese general who had once fought bravely under the Mongol banner. He had eaten at their tables, shared their victories, and spoken their words of loyalty. Yet in the shadows, he sent messages to the Song dynasty, trading secrets for promises that would never be kept. When his treachery was revealed, he was brought before the Khan's officers. There were no questions, no pleas, no trial. The order was simple: the cage beneath the water. They took him to the banks of the Yellow River at dawn. The mist drifted low, turning the light to silver. Soldiers worked in silence, fitting rough wooden planks together around his body. The space was so narrow that he could barely move. His breath came short, the smell of damp wood filling his lungs. As the final board was nailed into place, the sound echoed like a heartbeat against the still air. Then the ropes tightened, and the cage was dragged into the river. At first, the water reached his feet. It was cold, but almost gentle. Then it climbed to his knees, to his chest, to his throat. The light above shimmered through the moving surface, a trembling mirror of gold. He lifted his head as high as he could, the air sharp and sweet against his lips. The soldiers on the shore stood motionless, watching the cage drift farther from the land. When the first wave passed over his face, the instinct to breathe fought against the weight of fear. He could see the sun, pale and bright through the rippling surface, and for a moment, he believed he could reach it. But the cage pulled him downward. The water pressed against his ears, muffling the world into silence. His hands gripped the wooden bars until his fingers turned white. He tried to find air in the tiny pockets between the planks, but the water followed, filling every space. To drown slowly, is to lose hope by inches. The body struggles long after the mind understands it is over. Panic fades into exhaustion, and exhaustion into surrender. The river rocked the cage as if it were cradling him, yet every movement stole more of his breath. Above him the light flickered like a promise he could never claim. He saw the sun above him, and died knowing he could almost touch it. Among the Mongols there was a punishment reserved only for the bravest enemies, the ones whose defiance had earned a dark kind of respect. It was called death by 1,000 arrows. To die this way was to become a lesson, not only to the fallen army, but to every soldier who dared to imagine glory outside Mongol rule. At dawn the field was cleared, the ground was dry, the air sharp with dust and silence. In the center stood the condemned general, stripped of armor yet still proud. His eyes did not plead. Around him, Mongol archers took their places in a perfect circle. They moved with calm precision, adjusting the tension of their bows, drawing the strings until they hummed softly in unison. The rhythm of their breathing filled the air like the sound before a storm. The first arrow was loosed. It struck his thigh, a clean sound, almost gentle. Then another followed, and another, each finding its mark with ruthless accuracy. The general staggered but did not fall. His breath came in short bursts, his body twisting under the rhythm of impact. The sound of each arrow hitting flesh was heavy and wet, like the earth swallowing rain. The Mongols did not rush. They fired with the patience of artisans, crafting fear one shot at a time. Arrows began to bloom from his arms, his shoulders, his legs. They quivered with every movement, creating a faint rustle like reeds in the wind. The soldiers who watched could not look away. The execution ground had become a stage. Every gasp, every tremor, every fall of blood upon the dust was part of a choreography designed to teach obedience. The general fell to his knees, still breathing. The archers paused, lowering their bows for a moment of silence. Then the leader raised his hand, and the final volley was released. Dozens of arrows flew at once, slicing through the air with a sound that seemed to split the sky. The body jerked once, twice, then sagged against the weight of its own pain. The arrows stood upright in him like a forest of death, each one marking the point where defiance had ended. For a long moment, no one moved. The wind stirred the feathers on the shafts. The sun climbed higher, lighting the dust that rose from the trampled ground. What remained was not just a corpse, but a memory carved into every soldier's mind. The arrows did not just pierce flesh, they pierced memory. When the storm of arrows had ended, the silence that followed felt heavier than the sound itself. The Mongols understood that death could roar or whisper, and each form carried its own lesson. For the kings who defied Genghis Khan, their punishment would not come through flight and fire, but through the slow descent of weight. The archers had shown speed. Now it was time for patience. A wooden platform was raised in the center of the encampment, wide as a stage and dark as the night before execution. Beneath it, the condemned king was laid flat, his wrists tied, his face turned toward the shadow above. Around him stood the commanders of the army, silent and unmoving. The ceremony began not with a shout, but with the sound of a single stone dropped onto the platform. The echo rippled through the wood like the first note of a dirge. Another stone followed, and another. The structure began to groan as the weight gathered. The man beneath felt the first tremor of pressure along his chest. The air became thin, his breath shallow and loud in his own ears. Sweat slid into his eyes. The next load came heavier, and the next after that. The creaking grew deeper, a rhythm of suffering and gravity entwined. His ribs bent inward, cracking like dry branches. The sound was small but carried through the camp like a whisper no one could ignore. Blood filled his mouth. His eyes rolled upward, seeing only the dark underside of the wood pressing closer. Each added burden drew a sharper noise, a splinter, a moan, a break. The soldiers placed objects on the platform with a grim precision, as if building a monument rather than killing a man. The Mongols believed that this was the purest display of order, death not as chaos, but as calculation. The platform became the throne of judgment, and beneath it lay the truth of empire. Every groan of timber, every cracking bone, was a verse in the slow hymn of domination. When at last the structure stilled, the air carried no sound, only weight. The dust settled over the silent form below, and even the wind seemed to bow. The throne stands, but beneath it lie the crushed bones of kings. Through every campaign and every death that followed, Genghis Khan proved that execution was not simply punishment. It was communication. It was the language of power, spoken through silence, fire, and fear. Each method carried meaning. Each agony became a word in the grammar of conquest. The Mongols ruled through the precision of terror, shaping obedience not through laws, but through memory. From the bloodless carpets to the silver poured into blinded eyes. From the shrinking hide that stole a woman's breath to the drowning cage that erased hope. Each act was part of a single vision. It was the art of fear, crafted with the patience of an empire that understood the soul far better than the body. To kill was simple. To terrify generations was mastery. The Mongols turned death into a mirror where every ruler saw their own reflection trembling. Their enemies learned quickly. Cities opened their gates before the army arrived. Soldiers abandoned walls rather than face the horrors they had heard whispered across deserts and mountains. Stories of the silver tears, of the horses trampling kings, of the cages sinking beneath rivers, spread faster than the hooves that carried them. Fear became a weapon sharper than the curved blades of the riders. It conquered long before the first arrow was released. Yet even fear has its end. The empire born from terror stretched farther than any before it, but could not outlast the silence that followed. Power built on dread cannot feed itself forever. When the thunder of hooves faded and the banners fell, only the wind remained. It moved softly across the empty plains where nameless bones rested beneath the dust. The world remembered the Mongols not only for their victories, but for the echo of the deaths that made them possible. In that wind lies the last truth of Genghis Khan's rule. Terror can win empires, but never peace. If you believe that power written in blood never fades, subscribe to our channel where history breathes through the silence of execution grounds.